Robert Chun had been standing at the same spot for 3 hours straight. His weathered hands, always covered in thick brown leather gloves, gripped the security clipboard a bit too tightly. At 67 years old, he looked nothing like what people expected from the security guard at the fancy Riverside Art Gallery. The morning sun streamed through the massive glass windows, highlighting the expensive paintings that hung on pristine white walls. Robert watched as well-dressed visitors walked past him, some giving him curious looks, others completely ignoring his presence. He had gotten used to both reactions over the past 6 months. "Excuse me," a woman in a designer coat approached him. Her voice had that polite but condescending tone he knew all too well. "Could you tell me where the restroom is?" Robert pointed down the hallway with his gloved hand. "Take a left at the sculpture, then straight ahead, ma'am." The woman thanked him and walked away, but not before he caught her whispering to her friend about how the gallery really needed to hire younger, more professional-looking security staff. Robert had excellent hearing, despite his age. This wasn't the first time he'd overheard such comments. Just last week, during the monthly board meeting, he'd heard gallery director Patricia Williams defending her decision to keep him employed. The board members thought he was too old, too slow, and frankly, not intimidating enough for a place that housed million-dollar artwork. What they didn't know was that Robert had specifically asked for this job. After 25 years as a police detective, he could have easily found work at a corporate security firm or even started his own private investigation business. But he wanted to be here at this particular gallery for reasons that went far beyond a simple paycheck. The leather gloves were not just a fashion choice or protection against the cold. Robert wore them every single day, even during the hottest summer months. When new employees asked about them, he would simply say he had sensitive skin. It was easier than explaining the truth. Around noon, a group of art students from the local university arrived for their weekly tour. Their professor, Dr. Amanda Foster, had been bringing students here for years. She was one of the few people who actually treated Robert with genuine respect. "Good afternoon, Robert," she smiled warmly as she signed the visitor log. "How are you doing today?" "Just fine, Dr. Foster. The students seem excited about today's tour." "They always are. Your gallery has such an incredible collection." As the students filed past him, Robert noticed one of them staring at his gloves with curiosity. It was a young man with thick glasses and an art history textbook tucked under his arm. "Those are some serious gloves," the student commented. "Are you a motorcycle rider or something?" Robert chuckled softly. "Something like that, son." The truth was far more complicated. 3 years ago, Robert had been investigating a case involving stolen artifacts from various museums across the state. The criminal organization behind the thefts was sophisticated, well-connected, and extremely dangerous. During his final raid on their warehouse, Robert had discovered a bomb rigged to destroy all the evidence. He had two choices: evacuate and let millions of dollars worth of stolen art be destroyed, or stay and try to defuse the device. Robert chose to stay. The bomb went off while he was trying to cut the right wire. The explosion cost him 3 fingers on his right hand and left severe nerve damage throughout both hands. Most people would have taken early retirement after such an injury. The police department certainly encouraged it, offering him a generous disability pension and full benefits. But Robert wasn't ready to stop fighting crime. Instead, he worked with a team of engineers and medical specialists to create something that had never been done before. The gloves weren't just covering his scars. Hidden beneath the leather was the most advanced surveillance technology available to law enforcement. His prosthetic fingers contained micro-cameras that could record everything he touched or pointed at. The sensors in his damaged left hand could detect metal objects, chemical residues, and even changes in temperature that might indicate hidden compartments or safes. To everyone else, Robert looked like an aging security guard who struggled with simple tasks. They saw him fumble with door locks, drop his pen while writing reports, and need help carrying heavy objects. What they didn't realize was that every mistake was carefully calculated. Every awkward movement was actually Robert gathering information, recording conversations, and building detailed profiles of every person who entered the gallery. Patricia Williams had hired him because she believed in giving older workers a chance. She had no idea that she had actually recruited one of the most decorated detectives in the state, a man whose unconventional methods had solved cases that had baffled other investigators for years. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors. Robert observed them all, his trained eye picking up details that others would miss. The nervous businessman who kept checking his watch. The art collector who spent too much time examining the security cameras. The well-dressed woman who visited twice a week, but never seemed to actually look at the paintings. Each person was catalogued in Robert's memory, their behaviors noted and filed away for future reference. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous criminals were often the ones who looked the most respectable. Art theft was a gentleman's crime, performed by people with education, money, and connections. As closing time approached, Robert helped Patricia lock up the gallery. She always insisted on doing this together, despite his apparent clumsiness. With the electronic security system, Robert played his part perfectly, asking her to repeat the code sequence and pretending to struggle with the touchscreen controls. "You're getting better at this," Patricia said encouragingly as they walked to the parking lot. "Practice makes perfect," Robert replied. Knowing that he had memorized every detail of the security system on his first day, driving home in his modest sedan, Robert reflected on the day's observations. 3 new faces had caught his attention, and he would need to run background checks on all of them. The sophisticated criminal network he had been tracking for months was still active, and he was certain they had their sights set on the Riverside Gallery. His colleagues at the police department thought he was crazy for taking this job. They couldn't understand why a decorated detective would want to spend his retirement years standing around in an art gallery, being treated like a charity case by wealthy donors and condescending board members. But Robert knew something they didn't. Sometimes the best way to catch a criminal was to make them think you were no threat at all. Sometimes the most effective disguise was simply being underestimated. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new faces, and new opportunities to gather intelligence. Robert would be ready, standing at his post with his gloved hands and his carefully cultivated appearance of harmless incompetence. The criminals were coming. He could feel it in his damaged nerves and see it in the patterns of behavior he had been documenting for months. When they finally made their move, they would discover that the elderly security guard they had dismissed was actually their worst nightmare. Patricia Williams sat at the head of the polished conference table, trying to maintain her composure as the board members voiced their concerns for the 3rd time this month. The morning sun cast long shadows across the boardroom, but the atmosphere was anything but bright. "I'm telling you, Patricia, we need to reconsider our staffing choices," said board member Catherine Reynolds, a wealthy art collector who had donated significantly to the gallery. "That security guard of yours is becoming an embarrassment." Patricia took a deep breath. "Robert has been with us for 6 months, and we haven't had a single security incident during his watch." "That's not the point," interrupted James Morrison, another board member who owned several businesses in the city. "Image matters in our world. When donors see him struggling with basic tasks, it reflects poorly on our entire organization." The other board members nodded in agreement. Patricia had heard these complaints before, but they seemed to be getting louder and more frequent. Just yesterday, she had received a phone call from Margaret Ashworth, one of their biggest supporters, expressing concern about Robert's ability to handle emergency situations. "He dropped the visitor sign-in sheet 3 times last week," Catherine continued. "And don't get me started on how long it takes him to process simple paperwork. Those gloves make everything more difficult for him." Patricia had noticed Robert's struggles too. Simple tasks that should take minutes seemed to require much more time and effort from him. She often found herself helping him with the electronic security panel, which he seemed to have trouble remembering how to operate. Sometimes she wondered if hiring him had been a mistake born out of sympathy rather than sound judgment. Perhaps. "We could find him a position that's more suitable for someone his age," suggested Dr. Richard Hayes, the board's treasurer. Maybe something in our archives department, away from public view. He specifically requested the front security position, Patricia replied. And I believe everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves, regardless of age. What Patricia didn't tell the board was that Robert had come with surprisingly strong references. His former supervisor at the police department had called him one of the finest officers I've ever worked with, though he hadn't elaborated on the details. There was something about Robert that didn't quite match his apparent limitations, but Patricia couldn't put her finger on what it was. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Victoria Nash was having her own thoughts about the gallery's security as a respected art historian and frequent visitor to museums around the world. She had spent considerable time studying the Riverside Gallery's layout, security measures, and staff routines. Robert had caught her attention from her very first visit 3 months ago. Unlike the younger, more alert security guards she had encountered at other institutions, he seemed almost oblivious to the subtle activities happening around him. She had tested him carefully, lingering in restricted areas and handling displays in ways that should have triggered immediate intervention. Each time, Robert either didn't notice or responded too slowly to be effective. Victoria had even deliberately triggered a false alarm on one of the motion sensors and watched as Robert fumbled with the security panel for several minutes before finally managing to reset it with Patricia's help. Perfect, Victoria had whispered to herself that day. Robert was exactly the kind of security guard she had been hoping to find. Victoria had been planning something special for months. The gallery's newest acquisition, a rare 18th-century miniature portrait by Jean-Baptiste Grès, was worth more than $2 million. It was small enough to conceal easily, valuable enough to make the risk worthwhile, and displayed in a location that would be perfect for her needs. She had studied Robert's patterns carefully. He took his lunch break at exactly 12:30, every day, leaving the front desk unmanned for precisely 27 minutes. The backup security guard, a part-time college student named Tony, spent most of his time in the storage area during lunch hours, organizing supplies and catching up on paperwork. During her reconnaissance visits, Victoria had noticed that Robert seemed to have particular difficulty with the gallery's new digital security system. The previous month, she had watched him struggle for 10 minutes just to print a simple visitor report. When a minor emergency had occurred in the storage room, he had actually asked a visitor to help him locate the right button on the alarm panel. This is almost too easy, Victoria thought as she reviewed her plans. She had successfully stolen from more than a dozen institutions over the past 5 years, but never from a place with such seemingly inadequate security. Back at the gallery, Robert was well aware of the whispered conversations about his competence. He heard the board members' complaints when they thought he was out of earshot. He noticed the way wealthy visitors rolled their eyes when he took longer than expected to check their bags or process their paperwork. What none of them realized was that every fumbled task was carefully choreographed. The dropped papers allowed him to photograph documents and visitor information with the microcameras in his prosthetic fingers. His struggles with the security panel gave him opportunities to test different access codes and map the system's vulnerabilities. Even his slow, methodical bag checks were actually comprehensive. Security screenings that would have impressed his former colleagues at the police department. Robert had perfected the art of being underestimated during his years as a detective. Some of his most successful cases had been solved by playing the role of a bumbling, harmless investigator who posed no threat to sophisticated criminals. He had learned that people revealed far more information when they believed they were dealing with someone incompetent. The afternoon brought another test of Robert's carefully maintained facade. A group of insurance investigators arrived to assess the gallery's security measures for a policy renewal. Robert watched as they examined cameras, tested alarm systems, and interviewed staff members about procedures and protocols. "What about him?" one of the investigators asked Patricia, nodding toward Robert. "Robert is our front security officer," Patricia replied. Though her tone lacked confidence, the investigator approached Robert with a clipboard full of questions about emergency procedures, visitor screening protocols, and response times for various types of incidents. Robert answered each question slowly and uncertainly, occasionally asking the investigator to repeat things or explain technical terms. "I see," the investigator said, making notes that were clearly not favorable. "And how long have you been working?" "In security?" "This is my first security job," Robert replied truthfully. "I'm still learning all the procedures." After the investigators left, Patricia looked more worried than ever. Robert knew that his performance had raised red flags about the gallery's overall security effectiveness. Insurance premiums would likely increase, and the board would have even more ammunition for their arguments about replacing him. But Robert also knew that his apparent incompetence was serving a larger purpose. Somewhere in the city, criminals were watching the gallery and evaluating its vulnerabilities. They were gathering information about staff schedules, security protocols, and response capabilities. When they finally decided to make their move, they would base their plans on the assumption that Robert posed no significant threat to their operation. That would be their biggest mistake. As the day ended and Robert helped Patricia lock up the gallery, he reflected on the delicate balance he was maintaining. He needed to appear incompetent enough to avoid suspicion from potential thieves, but not so incompetent that he would be fired before he could complete his real mission. The criminals were getting closer. He could sense it in the increased frequency of suspicious visitors, the subtle questions being asked about security procedures, and the way certain individuals lingered near high-value displays. Soon, they would make their move, confident that they had identified the weakest link in the gallery's defenses. When that moment came, Robert would be ready to show them just how wrong they were. Dr. Victoria Nash sat in her elegant home office, surrounded by art books, auction catalogs, and detailed floor plans of the Riverside Gallery. 3 computer monitors displayed security camera footage, staff schedules, and architectural blueprints. That had taken her months to acquire through various legitimate and not-so-legitimate channels. The Grez miniature portrait was calling to her. Worth over $2 million and small enough to fit in a briefcase. It represented the perfect target for someone with her particular skills. Victoria had built her reputation in the underground art world by stealing pieces that other thieves considered impossible to take. Her success came from meticulous planning and an ability to blend into the legitimate art community. As a respected art historian with a PhD from Columbia University and published research on 18th-century French painting, she had access to museums and galleries around the world. No one suspected that the scholarly woman who gave lectures on artistic techniques was actually one of the most successful art thieves in the country. Victoria had been studying the Riverside Gallery for 4 months, visiting twice a week under the pretense of researching her next academic paper. She had mapped every camera angle, timed every guard rotation, and identified every potential weakness in their security system. The weak link, she was certain, was Robert Chun. From her very first encounter with the elderly security guard, Victoria had recognized an opportunity. Unlike the sharp, alert guards at major museums, Robert seemed overwhelmed by even basic security procedures. She had tested him carefully, pushing boundaries to see how he would respond. During one visit, she had deliberately walked into a restricted area marked Staff Only. Robert had noticed but took nearly 3 minutes to approach her, and when he did, he seemed uncertain about the proper protocol for handling the situation. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I think visitors aren't supposed to be back here," he had said hesitantly, clearly unsure of himself. Victoria had apologized profusely, claiming she was looking for the restroom and had gotten lost. Robert had accepted her explanation without question, even though any experienced security professional would have been suspicious of such a basic mistake from someone who visited the gallery regularly. Another time she had accidentally on purpose triggered a motion sensor near one of the valuable displays. The alarm had beeped softly, and Victoria watched as Robert fumbled with the security panel for several minutes, clearly struggling to remember the proper code sequence. He had eventually needed to call Patricia for help, a scene that convinced Victoria she had found the perfect mark. The plan Victoria had developed was elegant in its simplicity. The gallery's annual charity auction was scheduled for next Friday evening, an event that would draw hundreds of wealthy donors, art collectors, and society figures. The combination of champagne, social networking, and loud conversation would create the perfect cover for her operation. Victoria had already secured an invitation through her academic connections. Dr. Amanda Foster from the university had recommended her as a potential speaker for future events, giving Victoria a legitimate reason to attend and network with gallery supporters. The beauty of her plan lay in its timing. The auction would begin at 7 o'clock, with cocktails and viewing of the items up for bid. The actual bidding would start at 8:30, drawing everyone's attention to the main gallery space. This would leave the smaller exhibition rooms, including the one housing the Grès portrait, relatively empty. Victoria had spent weeks studying the gallery's security protocols during events. Additional guards were brought in for the auction, but they focused primarily on the main gallery and the areas where valuable auction items were displayed. The permanent collection in the smaller rooms remained under the protection of the regular security system, and Robert, supposedly watchful, her research had revealed a crucial flaw in the gallery's emergency procedures. The building's fire suppression system was connected to the main electrical panel, and a small, strategically placed fire in the storage area would trigger an automatic shutdown of the security cameras while emergency responders dealt with the situation. Victoria had already prepared the incendiary device, a small but effective combination of chemicals that would create enough smoke and flame to trigger the fire suppression system without causing serious damage to the building or endangering lives. The device was disguised as a common electrical component and could be easily concealed in her evening bag. The timing would be critical. Victoria planned to trigger the fire at exactly 9:15, when the auction bidding would be at its most intense and all attention would be focused on the auctioneer. In the confusion that followed, she would have approximately 8 to 10 minutes to reach the Grès portrait, remove it from its frame, and exit the building before the security system could be restored. Robert's predictable incompetence was the key element that made the entire plan feasible. Victoria had observed him during 2 previous evening events, and his performance had been consistently poor. He became easily flustered when multiple things happened at once, and his response to even minor emergencies was slow and uncertain. During the last auction, a simple power outage had left Robert completely paralyzed with indecision. He had stood at his post, uncertain whether to investigate the cause, evacuate visitors, or call for backup. By the time he finally acted, the power had already been restored and the situation resolved by others. Victoria was confident that a fire alarm would send Robert into complete panic mode. While he fumbled with emergency procedures and waited for instructions from Patricia or the fire department, Victoria would be completing her mission and preparing her escape. She had even planned her exit strategy around Robert's limitations. The gallery's rear entrance was equipped with an emergency exit alarm, but Victoria had noticed that Robert rarely checked that area during evening events. His focus remained fixed on the main entrance and the guest areas, leaving the back of the building essentially unmonitored. The stolen portrait would be hidden in a specially designed briefcase that would pass any casual inspection. Victoria had used similar containers in previous thefts, and they had never failed to fool security guards or law enforcement officers who weren't specifically looking for stolen artwork. By the time anyone realized the Grès portrait was missing, Victoria would be on a plane to Switzerland, where a private collector had already agreed to purchase the piece for $1.5 million, no questions asked. The collector was a reclusive billionaire who cared more about owning beautiful art than about its legal provenance. Victoria had successfully completed 11 similar thefts over the past 5 years, and not one had been traced back to her. Academic reputation provided perfect cover, and her careful selection of targets meant that she only struck when she was absolutely certain of success. The Riverside Gallery represented her most ambitious target yet, but also her most vulnerable. The combination of valuable artwork, weak security, and an incompetent guard created an opportunity that was simply too good to pass up. As Friday evening approached, Victoria felt the familiar mixture of excitement and confidence that came with a well-planned operation. She had accounted for every variable, planned for every contingency, and identified every possible weakness in the gallery's defenses. There was only one factor she hadn't considered: the possibility that Robert Chun was not at all what he appeared to be. Victoria spent the final days before the auction making her last preparations. She rehearsed her movements through the gallery, timing each step of the operation down to the second. She purchased the elegant black evening dress that would help her blend in with the other auction guests. She even had her hair styled at an expensive salon, ensuring that she would look like she belonged among the wealthy art collectors and society figures who would attend the event. On Thursday evening, Victoria made one final reconnaissance visit to the gallery. She wanted to confirm that nothing had changed in the security setup and that Robert was still performing at his usual level of incompetence. She was not disappointed. Robert fumbled with the visitor sign-in sheet, took an unusually long time to process her request to view the permanent collection, and seemed generally overwhelmed by the presence of several other visitors in the gallery at the same time. Perfect, Victoria thought as she left the gallery that evening. Tomorrow night that beautiful Grez will be mine. Friday evening arrived with perfect weather for the Riverside Gallery's annual charity auction. The sun was setting behind the building, casting a golden glow through the tall windows as elegantly dressed guests began arriving for the 7 o'clock event. Luxury cars filled the parking lot, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifted through the evening air. Robert stood at his usual post near the main entrance, but tonight he wore a crisp black suit instead of his typical security uniform. Patricia had insisted that all staff dress formally for such an important event, and Robert had complied without complaint. His ever-present leather gloves looked almost elegant against the dark fabric of his suit jacket. To the arriving guests, Robert appeared exactly as he had for the past 6 months, a well-meaning but somewhat incompetent elderly man who seemed slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the evening. Several guests had to repeat their names when checking in, and Robert fumbled with the guest list, requiring assistance from Patricia on more than one occasion. Dr. Victoria Nash arrived at 7:30, looking stunning in a black cocktail dress with diamond earrings that caught the gallery's sophisticated lighting. She had spent considerable time on her appearance, knowing that confidence and elegance would be essential to her plan's success. "Good evening," she said warmly to Robert as she approached the check-in table. "Dr. Victoria Nash, I believe I'm on the guest list." Robert searched through the papers with his usual apparent clumsiness, taking longer than necessary to locate her name. "Ah, here you are, Dr. Nash. Welcome to our auction." Victoria smiled and moved into the gallery, immediately beginning her mental countdown. She had memorized every aspect of the evening schedule, and everything needed to proceed exactly according to plan. The cocktail hour would last until 8:30, followed by the auction bidding. At 9:15, she would excuse herself from the main gallery and put her plan into motion. The evening progressed smoothly for the first hour. Guests admired the auction items, bid on pieces during the silent auction portion, and enjoyed champagne and elegant appetizers. Victoria mingled professionally, discussing art history with other guests and maintaining her cover as a legitimate academic researcher. Robert continued his security duties, checking on different areas of the gallery and monitoring the guests. To anyone watching, he seemed to be doing his job adequately, though not with particular skill or attention to detail. He occasionally stopped to chat with regular visitors who knew him and accepted compliments about how nice he looked in his formal attire. At 9 o'clock, the live auction began in earnest. Patricia served as the evening's MC, while a professional auctioneer conducted the bidding for major pieces. The main gallery filled with excited energy as valuable paintings and sculptures went to the highest bidders. Victoria positioned herself near the back of the crowd, close to the hallway that led to the smaller exhibition rooms where the Grez portrait was displayed. She checked her watch, 9:10. In 5 minutes, she would excuse herself to visit the restroom, but instead head to the storage area to plant her incendiary device. Exactly 9:15, Victoria quietly slipped away from the auction crowd. The hallway was empty, just as she had anticipated. She moved quickly toward the storage area, her heart rate elevated but her movements calm and confident. This was the moment she had been planning for months. She reached the storage room and quickly located the electrical panel where she would place the device. The small incendiary package was hidden in her evening bag, disguised as a compact mirror. Victoria had done this before, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she attached the device to the electrical housing. The timer was set for 3 minutes, giving her enough time to return to the auction crowd and establish her alibi. Before the fire alarm sounded, Victoria turned to leave the storage room, confident that her plan was proceeding flawlessly. That's when she saw Robert standing in the doorway, but this was not the fumbling, uncertain security guard she had been observing for months. Robert stood with perfect posture, his eyes sharp and alert, completely blocking her exit from the storage room. Gone was the hesitant, apologetic demeanor she had grown accustomed to. In its place was the bearing of someone with absolute authority and complete confidence. "Dr. Victoria Nash," Robert said, his voice carrying a strength and clarity that Victoria had never heard before. "I think you and I need to have a conversation." Victoria's mind raced as she tried to process this sudden change in Robert's behavior. This was not part of her plan. The elderly security guard who couldn't properly operate a security panel was speaking to her like a seasoned law enforcement officer. "I'm sorry, I think I got lost looking for the restroom," Victoria said, attempting to use the same excuse that had worked on Robert during her reconnaissance visits. Robert smiled, but it wasn't the confused, accommodating smile Victoria remembered. This smile was knowing, almost predatory. "No, Dr. Nash, you're exactly where you intended to be. And that device you just planted has a 3-minute timer, so we don't have much time to waste on false explanations." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Robert knew about the incendiary device. He knew about her plan. Somehow, the incompetent security guard had been watching her, understanding her intentions and waiting for this exact moment. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. The confident, scholarly tone she had cultivated was cracking under the pressure of Robert's intense stare. 3 months of reconnaissance visits, Robert continued, his voice steady and professional. 14 separate tests of our security procedures. 2 attempts to access restricted areas. And now, the placement of an incendiary device designed to disable our security cameras during the theft of the Grez miniature portrait. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Robert knew everything. Not just about tonight's plan, but about her entire operation. The months of careful preparation, the detailed surveillance, the systematic testing of the gallery's weaknesses. Robert had been aware of it all. "The timer on your device is now at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Robert said calmly. "I suggest you remove it before it triggers a real emergency that could endanger the guests upstairs." For the first time in her criminal career, Victoria was completely out of options. The man she had dismissed as a harmless incompetent had somehow seen through her carefully constructed facade and anticipated her every move. Worse, he seemed to know details about her plan that she was certain no one could have discovered. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for the incendiary device and carefully disconnected the timer. The small package felt heavier than it had just minutes before, weighed down by the realization that her perfect crime had become a perfect trap. "Good," Robert said, stepping aside to let her exit the storage room. "Now, let's take a walk to my office. We have a lot to discuss, and I think you'll find our conversation very educational." As they walked through the quiet hallway, Victoria could hear the sounds of the auction continuing in the main gallery. Guests were laughing, bidding on artwork, and enjoying their evening, completely unaware that a master criminal had just been caught in the act by a security guard who was clearly much more than he appeared to be. "Who are you?" Victoria asked. Quietly, as they reached Robert's small office near the back of the gallery, Robert turned to face her. And for the first time, Victoria saw his hands without the gloves. His right hand was clearly artificial, a sophisticated prosthetic that gleamed with advanced technology. His left hand bore the scars of serious injury, but moved with the precision of someone who had overcome significant physical challenges. "My name is Robert Chun," he said, pulling out a chair for Victoria to sit. And until 3 years ago, I was Detective Robert Chun of the Metropolitan Police Department's Art Crime Division. I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, Dr. Nash. The sound of police sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. Victoria realized that her career as an art thief had just come to an end. The police sirens grew louder as Robert carefully closed the office door behind them. Victoria sat in the chair he had offered, her mind still struggling to process the complete reversal of her situation. The confident art thief who had planned the perfect crime was now facing the reality that she had walked directly into the hands of a detective who had been hunting her for months. "I've been tracking your work for over 2 years, Dr. Nash," Robert said, as he settled into the chair behind his desk. "The theft from the Metropolitan Museum in Chicago, the missing Van Gogh sketch from the private collection in Boston, the Renaissance medallion that disappeared from the auction house in Philadelphia. All very sophisticated operations, all perfectly executed by someone with intimate knowledge of the art world." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "How did you know? I was so careful. Every detail was planned perfectly." Robert slowly removed his left glove, revealing the scarred but functional hand beneath. Then he removed his right glove, and Victoria saw the full extent of the prosthetic device that had replaced his missing fingers. The artificial digits gleamed, with sensors, microcameras, and technology that she was only beginning to understand. 3 years ago, I was investigating an art theft ring that had stolen over $20 million worth of pieces from museums across 5 states. Robert began. They were using bombs to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. During the final raid on their warehouse, I found a device rigged to destroy everything inside, including dozens of stolen masterpieces. He flexed his prosthetic fingers, and Victoria could see tiny lights blinking within the sophisticated mechanisms. I had a choice: evacuate and let millions of dollars in stolen art be destroyed, or stay and try to defuse the bomb. I chose to stay. The explosion cost me these 3 fingers and damaged the nerves throughout both hands. Victoria stared at the prosthetic device, beginning to understand the implications of what she was seeing. "Those aren't just replacement fingers, they're surveillance equipment. The most advanced surveillance technology available to law enforcement," Robert confirmed. "Every handshake, every document I've touched, every surface I've examined over the past 6 months has been recorded and analyzed. The cameras in my fingertips have photographed every person who entered this gallery, every conversation that took place within range, and every suspicious action that might indicate criminal intent." The full scope of Robert's deception was becoming clear to Victoria. "You've been recording everything. All my visits, all my questions about the security system, all my careful reconnaissance." "Everything," Robert agreed, "including the times you deliberately triggered alarms to test response times, the occasions when you accessed restricted areas, and the detailed photographs you took of the gallery's layout using your phone. My prosthetic hand detected the metal in your camera when you thought you were being subtle about documenting our security measures." Robert opened a laptop computer on his desk, and Victoria saw dozens of files labeled with dates and times corresponding to her visits to the gallery. Each file contained photographs, audio recordings, and detailed notes about her behavior and activities. "But the fumbling, the confusion with the security system, the way you seemed overwhelmed by simple tasks," Victoria protested. "I watched you struggle for months." Robert smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in his expression. "That was the hardest part of this assignment. Do you know how difficult it is for a detective with 25 years of experience to pretend he can't operate a simple security panel? Every instinct I have told me to be competent, professional, and alert. Instead, I had to train myself to appear confused and uncertain." He opened one of the computer files, showing Victoria a video recording of her first visit to the gallery. The footage was crystal clear, shot from the perspective of someone looking down at documents on the reception desk. "This was recorded by the cameras in my prosthetic fingers on the day you first visited. You can see yourself in the reflection. On the glass display case, photographing the Grez portrait with your phone. Victoria watched herself on the screen, believing she was being subtle and unobserved, while in reality every movement was being documented by the supposedly incompetent security guard standing just a few feet away. The police department received intelligence about a sophisticated art thief operating in the region, Robert continued. Someone with academic credentials? Someone who could blend into the legitimate art community. Someone who specialized in small, extremely valuable pieces that could be easily transported and sold to private collectors. He showed Victoria another file, this one containing her photograph alongside detailed background information about her academic career, her international travel patterns, and her connections to the underground art market. We knew the thief would eventually target this gallery. The Grez portrait was simply too valuable and too accessible to ignore, so we developed a plan to catch her in the act using methods she would never expect. Robert stood up and walked to a small safe hidden behind a painting on the office wall. He entered a complex code and removed several items, including his police badge, his detective credentials, and a small device that looked like a hearing aid. This is a direct communication link to the police units waiting outside, he explained, showing Victoria the earpiece. I've been in constant contact with my former colleagues throughout this operation. They've been listening to every word of our conversation. The reality of her situation hit Victoria with devastating force. Not only had she been caught in the act of attempting theft, but law enforcement had been building a comprehensive case against her for months. Every piece of evidence they would need for a conviction had been carefully documented by the man she had dismissed as a harmless incompetent. The board members who complained about my competence, the insurance investigators who questioned my abilities, even the gallery director who worried about my performance, Robert said. They were all seeing exactly what I wanted them to see. The perfect disguise isn't a costume or a false identity. The perfect disguise is simply being completely underestimated. Victoria thought about all the time she had tested Robert, all the opportunities she had been given to observe his apparent weaknesses, all the confidence she had built in her ability to outsmart the gallery's security measures. You let me think I was in control. You were never in control, Robert said, gently. From the moment you first walked into this gallery, you were walking into a carefully prepared trap. Every security weakness you identified was intentionally created. Every opportunity you discovered was deliberately placed in your path. Even the timing of tonight's auction was chosen specifically to encourage you to make your move. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of the police officers who had been waiting for Robert's signal. Victoria could hear the auction continuing in the main gallery, the guests completely unaware that a major criminal investigation was concluding just down the hall. Dr. Victoria Nash, Robert said formally, you are under arrest for attempted theft, possession of an incendiary device, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the police officers entered the office, Victoria realized that her career as one of the country's most successful art thieves was over. The academic reputation she had built, the sophisticated criminal network she had developed, the millions of dollars in stolen artwork she had sold, all of it would now be exposed and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Robert watched as the officers placed handcuffs on Victoria and began the process of formally arresting her. His expression was professional but not unkind. After spending months preparing for this moment, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief that the operation had concluded successfully. Detective Chun, one of the officers said, the crime scene unit is ready to process the evidence. We'll need you to walk us through everything that happened tonight. Robert nodded, already mentally preparing the detailed report he would need to file. But first, he had to return to the auction and ensure that the evening's legitimate activities could continue without disruption. The guests upstairs would never know how close they had come to witnessing a major art theft or how the bumbling security guard they had dismissed had actually prevented a master criminal from striking again. As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at Robert one final time. How many other cases are you working on? How many other criminals? Think they've found an easy target? Robert adjusted his gloves, carefully concealing the sophisticated surveillance equipment that had made this operation possible. That, he said with a slight smile, would be telling. The door closed behind the police officers, leaving Robert alone in his office with the evidence of a successful conclusion to one of the most complex undercover operations of his career. Tomorrow, he would return to his post as the apparently incompetent security guard, ready to identify and catch the next criminal who made the mistake of underestimating him. The story of Detective Robert Chun's final case began 3 years earlier, on a cold Tuesday morning in February. Robert had been investigating a sophisticated art theft ring that had been operating across multiple states, stealing millions of dollars worth of paintings, sculptures, and historical artifacts from museums, galleries, and private collections. The case had consumed 2 years of his life. The thieves were professionals who used advanced technology, inside information, and carefully planned operations that left few clues behind. They seemed to have connections throughout the legitimate art world, including auction houses, insurance companies, and even some museums themselves. Robert had finally traced the organization to a warehouse in an industrial district outside the city. Intelligence suggested that the building contained not only the stolen artwork, but also the evidence needed to identify and prosecute the entire criminal network. After months of surveillance and preparation, Robert's team was ready to execute a raid that would shut down the operation permanently. The raid began at dawn, with multiple police units surrounding the warehouse while Robert led a small team inside to secure the evidence. What they found exceeded their expectations: dozens of stolen masterpieces, detailed records of past thefts, and plans for future operations that would have netted the criminals tens of millions of dollars. But the thieves had prepared for the possibility of discovery. Hidden throughout the warehouse were incendiary devices designed to destroy all evidence if law enforcement ever found their operation. As Robert's team worked to catalog and secure the stolen artwork, one of the officers discovered a sophisticated bomb connected to motion sensors throughout the building. "Detective Chun," Officer Martinez called out from the back of the warehouse. "You need to see this. There's a device here with a timer, and it's counting down." Robert immediately ordered his team to evacuate the building and call for the bomb squad. But as they prepared to leave, he realized the devastating implications of their withdrawal. The bomb was designed to create an intense fire that would completely destroy the warehouse and everything inside it. Dozens of priceless works of art, some dating back centuries, would be lost forever. More importantly, the evidence they had spent 2 years gathering would be destroyed. The detailed records that could identify victims, recover stolen artwork from around the world, and prosecute the criminals responsible would disappear in the explosion. The art theft ring would simply relocate and continue their operations elsewhere. Robert made a decision that would change his life forever. While his team evacuated to a safe distance, he remained in the warehouse and attempted to defuse the bomb himself. He had received basic explosives training early in his career, but this device was far more sophisticated than anything he had encountered before. Working with a small toolkit and his cell phone's flashlight, Robert carefully examined the bomb's construction. The device used multiple timers and backup detonators, designed to explode even if the primary mechanism was disabled. He had less than 10 minutes to identify and disconnect all of the critical components. Robert called the bomb squad dispatcher and described what he was seeing, receiving guidance from experts who were still 15 minutes away from the scene. Step by step, he worked to isolate the various components of the device, knowing that a single mistake would cost him his life and destroy the evidence he was trying to preserve. With 3 minutes remaining on the timer, Robert thought he had successfully disabled the primary detonator. But as he reached for what he believed was the final component, a backup timer activated, triggered by his handling of the device. The criminals had anticipated that someone might try to defuse their bomb and had included a fail-safe mechanism designed to prevent exactly what Robert was attempting. The explosion threw Robert across the warehouse, slanting him into a concrete wall and burying him under debris. The blast destroyed 3 fingers on his right hand and caused severe nerve damage throughout both arms. Shrapnel from the device left him with permanent scars and chronic pain that would affect him for the rest of his life, but Robert's sacrifice was not in vain. The explosion destroyed only about 30% of the warehouse contents, leaving most of the stolen artwork and evidence intact. The detailed records he had tried to save led to the arrest and prosecution of 47 individuals involved in the theft ring, including museum employees, auction house workers, and private collectors who had knowingly purchased stolen pieces. During his long recovery in the hospital, Robert received visits from dozens of colleagues, crime victims, and even museum directors whose stolen artwork had been recovered because of his actions. But the visit that meant the most came from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the director of the Children's Hospital Foundation. "Detective Chun," she said, sitting beside his hospital bed, "I wanted to thank you personally. One of the paintings you recovered was stolen from our foundation's collection 3 years ago. It was a small portrait that had been donated by a family in memory of their daughter who died in our care. The painting wasn't worth much money, but it meant everything to that family." Dr. Morrison showed Robert a photograph of the portrait, depicting a young girl with bright eyes and a hopeful smile. "Because of what you did, we were able to return this painting to the family. They have their daughter's memory back." That conversation helped Robert understand that his sacrifice had been worthwhile. The physical injuries he had sustained were painful and permanent, but the lives he had touched and the justice he had served made the cost acceptable. The police department wanted to retire Robert on full disability benefits, but he wasn't ready to stop fighting crime. Instead, he worked with a team of engineers and medical specialists to develop a revolutionary prosthetic device that could serve as a surveillance tool for undercover operations. The prosthetic fingers contained microcameras, audio recording equipment, and sensors that could detect metals, chemicals, and temperature variations. The device was connected to a small computer worn on Robert's belt, which could store and transmit data to police headquarters in real time. This technology could revolutionize undercover police work, the lead engineer explained during one of Robert's training sessions. An officer could gather evidence while appearing to be completely harmless and non-threatening. Robert had immediately seen the potential applications for art crime investigation. Criminals in the art world were typically sophisticated, well-educated, and extremely cautious about law enforcement. They would never suspect that a disabled security guard could be documenting their activities with advanced surveillance technology when intelligence reached the police department about a master art thief operating in the region. Robert volunteered for an undercover assignment that would put his new abilities to the test. The target was someone who specialized in stealing from galleries and museums, someone who carefully studied security procedures and identified weaknesses before striking. Robert's plan was to position himself as the perfect target, an apparently incompetent security guard who would represent the weakest link in any institution's defenses. Criminals would focus on him as their point of vulnerability, never realizing that their careful observation was actually providing law enforcement with detailed documentation of their criminal intent. The assignment required Robert to suppress every instinct he had developed during 25 years as a police officer. Instead of being alert, professional, and competent, he had to appear confused, uncertain, and overwhelmed by simple tasks. Instead of projecting authority and confidence, he had to seem like someone who posed no threat to criminal activity. Patricia Williams had hired him based on his references from the police department, though she didn't know the full details of his background or current mission. To her, Robert was a retired officer who deserved a chance to contribute to society despite his physical limitations. She had no idea that she was actually providing cover for one of the most sophisticated undercover operations in the department's history. For 6 months, Robert had played his role perfectly while using his prosthetic surveillance equipment to monitor everyone who entered the gallery. He documented suspicious behavior, recorded conversations, and built detailed profiles of potential threats. When Dr. Victoria Nash began her reconnaissance activities, Robert immediately recognized the patterns he had been trained to identify. The operation had required patience, acting ability, and a willingness to endure constant criticism about his apparent incompetence. But for Robert, the temporary damage to his professional pride was a small price to pay for the opportunity to catch a criminal who had been stealing priceless artwork for years. As news of Victoria's arrest spread through law enforcement circles, Robert's innovative approach to undercover investigation attracted attention from police departments around the country. The combination of advanced surveillance, technology, and psychological misdirection had proven incredibly effective against sophisticated criminals who thought they were smarter than traditional law enforcement methods, but more than the professional recognition. Robert felt satisfaction in knowing that his final case had prevented countless future thefts, and the news of Dr. Victoria Nash's arrest broke on Monday morning, sending shockwaves through the international art community. The woman, who had been respected as a legitimate art historian and guest lecturer at prestigious universities, was revealed to be one of the most successful art thieves in recent history. Television news programs led with the story, showing footage of Victoria being led away in handcuffs while reporters explained how a seemingly simple security guard had orchestrated one of the most sophisticated undercover operations in law enforcement history. The contrast between the elegant, scholarly woman in her evening dress and the reality of her criminal activities captivated viewers around the world. At the Riverside Gallery, Patricia Williams found herself at the center of a media storm she had never anticipated. Reporters gathered outside the building, eager to interview the gallery director, who had unknowingly hired a decorated detective to work as her security guard. "I had no idea," Patricia told the cameras, still struggling to process the revelation about Robert's true identity. "I hired him because I believed in giving experienced workers a second chance. I never imagined he was actually conducting a police investigation right under our noses." The board members, who had spent months complaining about Robert's competence, were forced to face the embarrassing reality of their misjudgment. Catherine Reynolds, who had been the most vocal critic of Robert's abilities, found herself apologizing publicly for her earlier comments. "We completely underestimated Detective Chun," she admitted during a hastily arranged press conference. "While we were questioning his qualifications, he was actually protecting our gallery and our community from a dangerous criminal. We owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude." As investigators began reviewing the evidence Robert had gathered over 6 months, the scope of Victoria's criminal activities became clear. The surveillance recordings from his prosthetic device provided a detailed timeline of her reconnaissance activities, showing how she had systematically studied the gallery's security procedures and identified what she believed were exploitable weaknesses. FBI Art Crime Division agents arrived from Washington to take custody of the evidence and coordinate with international authorities. Victoria's apartment and office were searched, revealing detailed plans for thefts at galleries and museums across 3 countries. Computer files showed connections to private collectors who had knowingly purchased stolen artwork, as well as forgers who had created false documentation for pieces Victoria had stolen. "This investigation has opened up cases we've been working on for years," Special Agent Linda Rodriguez told reporters. Dr. Nash was connected to a network of criminals operating throughout the art world. "The evidence Detective Chun gathered will help us recover stolen artwork and prosecute individuals who have been operating with impunity for decades." The most shocking discovery came when investigators traced Victoria's past activities. The theft techniques and security analysis methods documented in her personal files matched unsolved cases dating back more than 5 years. Museums from Chicago to Amsterdam had been victimized by someone using identical methods to the ones Victoria had planned for the Riverside Gallery. Robert found himself thrust into the spotlight as details of his undercover operation became public. News programs wanted to interview the detective who had sacrificed his career and his health to catch criminals, then developed revolutionary surveillance techniques to continue serving justice despite his disabilities. "I never wanted to be famous," Robert told Patricia during one of their first conversations after the arrest. I just wanted to catch criminals and protect people's property. Art theft isn't just about money. These pieces represent culture, history, and beauty that belongs to all of humanity. The prosthetic surveillance technology Robert had helped develop attracted immediate attention from law enforcement agencies around the world. The combination of advanced recording equipment and the psychological advantage of being underestimated proved to be incredibly effective against sophisticated criminals. Within weeks of Victoria's arrest, police departments from 6 different countries had contacted the manufacturer of Robert's prosthetic device, seeking to obtain similar equipment for their own undercover operations. The technology that had grown out of Robert's personal tragedy was becoming a valuable tool for fighting crime on an international scale. The trial preparations revealed the full extent of Victoria's criminal enterprise. Prosecutors discovered that she had stolen artwork worth more than $15 million over a 5-year period. The pieces had been sold to private collectors in Switzerland, Dubai, and Hong Kong. People who paid premium prices for stolen art, specifically because they enjoyed owning pieces that no one else could legally possess. Recovery efforts began immediately, with international law enforcement working to locate and return the stolen artwork to its rightful owners. Several museums that had given up hope of ever seeing their stolen pieces again found themselves preparing to welcome back paintings and sculptures they had lost years earlier. The psychological impact of Robert's success extended far beyond the immediate case. Art thieves around the world suddenly had to consider the possibility that any security guard, janitor, or maintenance worker might actually be an undercover officer equipped with advanced surveillance technology. The criminal confidence that had allowed people like Victoria to operate freely was shattered by the realization that law enforcement had developed new methods for catching seemingly uncatchable criminals. Patricia Williams held a special ceremony at the gallery to honor Robert's service and publicly acknowledge what he had accomplished. The same wealthy donors who had questioned his competence now lined up to shake his hand and thank him for protecting their community's cultural treasures. Robert taught all of us an important lesson about assumptions and appearances, Patricia said during her speech. We judged him based on what we could see, never imagining the strength, intelligence, and dedication he brought to his work every single day. The insurance company that had been concerned about the gallery's security procedures issued a public statement praising Robert's work and announcing that they were developing new policies to encourage other institutions to employ similar innovative security measures. Dr. Amanda Foster, the university professor who had always treated Robert with respect, spoke at the ceremony about the importance of recognizing people's true value, regardless of their physical limitations or apparent circumstances. Detective Chun showed us that heroism doesn't always look the way we expect it to, she said. Sometimes the most effective protection comes from someone who seems vulnerable but possesses the intelligence and determination to outsmart those who would do us harm. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a plaque honoring Robert's service, to be permanently displayed in the gallery's main entrance. The inscription read, "In recognition of Detective Robert Chun, whose courage, intelligence, and innovative methods protected our community's cultural heritage while inspiring new approaches to law enforcement worldwide." As reporters and photographers documented the event, Robert reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him from a hospital bed to international recognition for his innovative police work. The explosion that had ended his conventional career had actually opened doors to accomplishments he never could have imagined, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the families whose stolen artwork would be returned as a result of his investigation. Like the family Dr. Morrison had told him about in the hospital, there were dozens of people who would have their treasured possessions back because Robert had been willing to endure months of criticism and apparent failure in order to catch a master criminal. The art world would never be quite the same. Criminals who had grown comfortable with traditional security measures now had to worry about surveillance, technology they couldn't detect, and undercover officers they couldn't identify. Robert's methods were already being studied and adapted by law enforcement agencies around the world, ensuring that his innovative approach would continue protecting cultural treasures long after his own career ended. Victoria Nash, meanwhile, faced the prospect of spending the next 20 years in federal prison, her reputation destroyed and her criminal network dismantled. The sophisticated art historian who had believed she was smarter than any security guard had discovered too late that intelligence comes in many forms, and that underestimating people can be a criminal's most dangerous mistake. 6 months after Victoria Nash's arrest, the Riverside Gallery hosted a retirement ceremony that drew law enforcement officials, art world dignitaries, and community leaders from across the region. The same elegant main gallery that had hosted the charity auction where Victoria was caught now served as the venue for celebrating the career of the man who had brought her to justice. Robert stood at the podium where Patricia had once conducted art auctions, but today he was the guest of honor rather than the security guard watching from the sidelines. Gone was the fumbling, uncertain demeanor he had cultivated for his undercover operation. In its place was the confident bearing of a decorated law enforcement officer who had dedicated his life to protecting others and seeking justice. The ceremony began with remarks from Police Chief Daniel Martinez, who had worked with Robert for over a decade before his retirement from active duty. Detective Robert Chun represents the best of what law enforcement can be, Chief Martinez told the gathered crowd. His willingness to sacrifice his own safety to protect evidence and his innovative approach to undercover work have changed how we think about fighting sophisticated crime. The audience included many of the same board members and wealthy donors who had once questioned Robert's competence. Catherine Reynolds, who had been his harshest critic, spoke emotionally about the lesson his deception had taught her about judging people based on appearances. "For months I complained about Robert's abilities," she admitted to the crowd. "I was embarrassed by what I saw as his fumbling incompetence. Now I understand that what I interpreted as weakness was actually the mark of a master investigator, who was protecting all of us while we slept soundly in our beds." Special Agent Linda Rodriguez from the FBI Art Crime Division presented Robert with a commendation for his exceptional service to law enforcement and his contribution to international efforts to combat art theft. The evidence he had gathered during his undercover operation had led to the recovery of stolen artwork worth over $25 million and the prosecution of criminals in 7 different countries. Detective Chun's innovative methods have revolutionized how we approach undercover investigations, Agent Rodriguez explained. The surveillance technology he helped develop is now being used by law enforcement agencies around the world, and his psychological insights about the power of being underestimated have influenced training programs from New York to London. Dr. Amanda Foster represented the academic community in thanking Robert for his service. As someone who had always treated him with respect during his months as a security guard, she spoke about the importance of recognizing people's true worth regardless of their circumstances. "Robert taught us that heroism often wears humble clothes," Dr. Foster said. "While we were focused on appearances, he was quietly documenting criminal activity and building a case that would protect cultural treasures around the world." His work reminds us that some of the most important contributions to society come from people we might otherwise overlook. The most moving moment of the ceremony came when Robert removed his prosthetic surveillance device for the final time. The sophisticated equipment that had allowed him to catch Victoria Nash and revolutionize undercover police work was carefully placed in a specially designed display case. "This technology was born from personal tragedy," Robert said as he addressed the audience. "3 years ago, I lost these fingers trying to save stolen artwork from destruction. Today, I'm donating this prosthetic device to the Police Academy's Training Museum, where it will help inspire future officers to think creatively about overcoming challenges and protecting the communities they serve." The device would be permanently displayed alongside other innovative law enforcement tools, with detailed explanations of how Robert had used it to document criminal activity while appearing to be a harmless, incompetent security guard. Police Academy instructors plan to use Robert's case as a teaching example of how physical limitations could be transformed into operational advantages through intelligence and determination. Patricia Williams spoke about the privilege of having Robert on her staff, even though she hadn't understood his true role at the time. Robert protected our gallery and our community while teaching all of us important lessons about assumptions, appearances, and the many forms that courage can take. We are honored to have been part of his final case. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of a key to the city from Mayor Jennifer Thompson, who praised Robert's service to the community and his contribution to public safety. Detective Chun exemplifies the values our city holds dear: service to others, innovation in the face of adversity, and the determination to protect what matters most to our community. As the formal ceremony ended, Robert was surrounded by colleagues, friends, and community members who wanted to thank him personally for his service. Among them were several families whose stolen artwork had been recovered as a result of his investigation, people who had traveled from across the country to meet the man who had helped return their treasured possessions. One elderly woman approached Robert with tears in her eyes, carrying a small framed photograph. "Detective Chun," she said, "this is a picture of the painting that was stolen from my home 5 years ago. Because of what you did, my granddaughter's portrait is hanging in my living room again. I wanted you to see her face and know that your sacrifice brought her home." These personal encounters reminded Robert why he had chosen to continue fighting crime despite his injuries. Art theft wasn't just about money or objects, it was about memories, family history, and cultural heritage that connected people to their past and to each other. The international impact of Robert's work continued to grow in the months following his retirement. Police departments in 12 countries had adopted similar prosthetic surveillance technology, and several major art theft cases had been solved using methods inspired by his innovative approach. The psychological element of his strategy, using apparent weakness to gain the trust and overconfidence of criminals, became a standard technique taught in undercover training programs around the world. Law enforcement officers learned to recognize the power of being underestimated and to use criminals' assumptions against them. Victoria Nash's trial had concluded 2 months earlier with her conviction on 23 felony charges related to art theft, fraud, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $18 million. Her academic credentials were revoked, and her published research was removed from university curricula worldwide. The criminal network she had been part of was completely dismantled, with 47 individuals arrested across multiple countries. The sophisticated system that had allowed stolen art to be sold to private collectors without questions was exposed and shut down, making it significantly more difficult for future art thieves to find buyers for their stolen goods. As Robert left a gallery for the final time as a retiree, he walked past the security desk where he had spent 6 months playing the role of an incompetent guard. The new security officer, a young man named David Kim, approached him with obvious respect and admiration. "Detective Chun," David said, "I just want you to know that I've studied everything about your operation here. If I can be half as effective as you were, I'll consider myself successful." Robert smiled and shook David's hand with his scarred but steady left hand. "Just remember," he said, "the most dangerous criminals are often the ones who think they're smarter than everyone else. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to ask for help when you need it." Walking to his car in the parking lot, Robert reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. The explosion that had ended his conventional police career had actually led to his most significant contribution to law enforcement. The physical limitations that others saw as disabilities had become the foundation for revolutionary surveillance techniques that would protect communities around the world. As he drove home through the city he had served for over 3 decades, Robert felt a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. His career in law enforcement was ending, but his legacy would continue through the officers who would use his methods, the criminals who would be caught using his technology, and the artwork that would be protected because of his innovative approach to fighting crime. The man who had once been laughed at as an incompetent security guard was now recognized internationally as a pioneer in undercover police work. But more importantly, he had proven that true strength comes not from physical ability or social status, but from intelligence, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for the greater good, Robert's story would be told. in police academies and law enforcement conferences for years to come, inspiring new generations of officers to think creatively about solving problems and protecting their communities. The secret in his glove had been revealed, but its impact on law enforcement and public safety was just beginning.